Hey, what's up, guys? It's the Stick Figure Historian again, and this week we're finally getting into the story of the Battle of Edgehill. The air was fraught with the crispness of late October when the sun rose on Edgehill, but the fainter of heart had shivered with more than cold during the night. The first great battle of this terrible civil war was about to begin, and the beginning of a war must always mean the end of the lives of many. God alone knew who would survive to see next sunrise. In the camp of the Royalists, Major General Jacob Astley lifted his head to the heavens and uttered a prayer that has been echoed by hundreds and thousands of soldiers over the bygone centuries until this day. O Lord, thou knowest how busy I must be this day. If I forget thee, do not thou forget me. The armies did not engage right at sunrise, however. It takes a while to get troops into their proper rank and positions, and since many of the soldiers on both sides were new men, it took a good deal longer than it would have with a trained army. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon before all was truly ready. King Charles rode up and down the lines of his troops, encouraging them to stand bravely and fight their best. Behind him rode little Prince Charles and his brother James. Only 12 and 9 they were, yet their father deemed it proper they should witness horror of war. The Roundheads watched from across the field as the king shouted cheer to his men. Their anger was kindled, and the order was given to fire. The first cannon shots flew across the field towards the listening Royalists. The king hastily ended his speeches, wishing to stay in one piece for the remainder of the fight, and hurried to the rear. For a time there was no close combat, only cannonballs flying in opposite directions as each army tried to outdo the other in an artillery battle. The Royalists were receiving far more shots than they were giving, however, due to bad placement of their guns. Rupert's warhorse pawed the ground, impatient as his master to join the fray. At last the fire slackened, and with a shout the prince's cavalry troop drew their broadswords and swept down like furies upon the left side of the Parliament army. Faster and faster they went, and greater grew the fear in the watching Roundheads' hearts. At last they broke and fled. To where? They knew not, so long as it was far from the flashing swords and pounding hooves. Rupert's charge was crowned with glorious success, but it wasn't a lasting one. The prince didn't keep good control over his troops, or over himself, for that matter. He allowed his men to scatter and plundered the baggage of the dead and flying enemy. A similar cavalry charge was led on the right side of the Parliament army, but the commander of that one, Henry Wilmot, was not well disciplined either, and the men scattered there too. Meanwhile, back on the battlefield, the king's footmen were making their move. They charged forward with a fury to match Rupert's courage, and for a time made great execution in the ranks of the Roundhead infantry. But you will notice I said it was but for a time. Old Robin had kept a special troop of cavalry in the rear of his army as a reserve, and these he now unleashed on the prevailing Royalists. Now, it is of course a fact of nature that a man on a horse has a great advantage over a man on the ground. Normally, footmen are supposed to be protected from cavalry attacks by their own horsemen. But where was Rupert? What of Wilmot? Instead of remaining at their post of duty, they were still distracted with their pillaging frolic. The Royalist footmen suffered terribly under the sweeping blows of the Roundhead cavalry reserves. The king called to one of his most trusted men and told him to hurry little Prince Charles and James away to a place of safety. And it doesn't look like he's doing a very good job watching them here, but moving on. Amidst the scene of terrible conflict, the royal standard bearer, Sir Edmund Verney, was cut down, and the flag was stolen away. To take a standard in war is accounted a high honor, and Arthur Young, the Roundhead who had accomplished this feat, was surely quite pleased with himself. Yet, if it is an honor to the victors, it is necessarily a humiliation to the vanquished. The king's men watched with sinking hearts as their flag was carried into the ranks of the enemy. But there were 3 men, Robert Welch, John Smith, and Chichley. I'm sorry that his first name has not come down to us. Braver hearts, who did not idly stare and gawk. They were determined to retrieve the flag, and with it their honor, or else die in the attempt. Though brave, they were not foolhardy. Instead of charging into the Roundhead ranks, they employed a method of cunning. In the midst of a battle, it can be difficult to tell friend from foe. The Roundhead officers knew this, of course, and to help with this issue, all wore orange scarves as a token of their loyalty. Welch, Smith, and Chichley knew this fact as well, and here they took full advantage of it. Finding a few dead Parliament officers, they stripped them of their scarves and tied them on their own selves. This done, it was a simple matter to ride into the surging wild masses of enemy troops, for no one suspected or noticed them in the chaos. The daring trio soon found old Robin's secretary, who had been given charge of the royal standard. It is not fitting, they told this man, that a mere penman should bear that treasure. It was not entirely an untrue statement. In terms of rank, a secretary would have never been allowed to hold the king's flag. The secretary handed the item over without protest. And off the daring fellows rode. I'm sorry to say that poor Chichley was shot down in the escape, but Welch and Smith did indeed return the standard to their king, and were rewarded well, I can tell you. Each received a medal of honor and was made a baronet. But it is here that we come to the sad part of our tale. It is only one of the many consequences inflicted by Prince Rupert's folly, but it is one that has been written. The rest are lost, buried with the men who fell on that terrible day at Edgehill. In that charge of the Parliament cavalry, Lord Lindsay was shot in the thigh. The enemy horsemen then swelled around him, cutting him off from his friends. But no amount of enemies or danger can separate a loving son from his father. Young Montague had seen his wounded father fall, and forgetting all else, he rushed through the Roundhead ranks and took him up in his arms. The battle mattered no longer to him. He immediately handed over his sword in surrender, and begged to be allowed to care for his wounded father. Montague was granted permission to carry him to a nearby shed, where he struggled to stop the flow of blood from the shattered limb. Anger burned within Lord Lindsay's heart at the terrible misfortunes that had befallen himself and his king's army. In his mind, it was all Rupert's fault. "If it please God I should survive," he told his son, "I never will fight in the same field with boys again." But never more would Lindsay bear a sword or gun. Despite all brave Montague's efforts, the bleeding could not be stopped. He died that night, along with all hope of a Royalist victory.